The military hospital had seen difficult days before, but that morning felt different from the start. The emergency entrance was crowded with movement. Stretchers rolled in and out, nurses called for supplies, and doctors spoke in quick, urgent voices. It was the kind of organized chaos everyone there knew how to handle. Yet in the center of it all, one patient had brought everything to a standstill. He had arrived just before sunrise. No one in the hospital had expected him. There had been no advance notice, no special request, no detailed chart waiting at the front desk. Just a secure transport vehicle and two silent officers escorting a man who looked like he had been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was in his late 30s, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and a stare so distant it unsettled everyone who met it. His left arm was wrapped in a temporary field dressing, and his breathing was uneven, but he seemed far less concerned about his own condition than the people trying to help him. The moment they brought him into the trauma wing, he made one thing clear. No medics. At first, the staff thought it was pain talking. Patients in distress often resisted treatment. It was not unusual. But when a nurse stepped closer to check his vitals, he pulled away sharply. No medics, he repeated, louder this time. A physician tried next, calmly introducing himself and explaining the need for immediate care. The man turned his face toward the wall and refused to respond. Within minutes, the room had become tense. His injury was serious enough that delay was risky, but every attempt to help him ended the same way. He would not answer questions. He would not allow an examination. He would not even let anyone touch the bandage on his arm. It was as if the very presence of medical staff triggered something deep inside him. The officers who had escorted him offered little information. "He's under stress," one of them said. That was all. No explanation. No details. Just enough to make everyone more uneasy. As the morning passed, the patient's resistance only grew stronger. 3 medics tried speaking with him. 2 senior doctors attempted to reason with him. A military psychiatrist was called in. Nothing worked. Each time he repeated the same refusal. No medics. Soon the frustration in the room became impossible to ignore. The doctors were losing patience. The nurses were worried. The administrators were whispering about protocol. It was not just about one patient anymore. It was about control. A hospital functioned on trust, communication, and immediate action. This man had shut down all 3. By mid-morning, word had spread through the building. There was a veteran in trauma who would not let anyone near him. Some said he had served overseas in classified operations. Others claimed he had survived something terrible. No one knew the truth. But everyone knew one thing. Something about him was different. In the middle of all this stood one nurse, quietly observing from the edge of the hallway. She had been on shift since midnight. Her badge identified her as a senior trauma nurse, though most people in the hospital simply knew her as the calm one. She was not the loudest in the room or the most decorated. She rarely pushed herself into the center of attention. But when things became difficult, people often looked to her. Not because she demanded authority, because she carried it naturally. She watched as another doctor emerged from the patient's room, rubbing his forehead. "He won't cooperate," he said sharply. "We can't keep doing this." A younger nurse beside him asked, "What happens if he keeps refusing?" The doctor exhaled. "Then we wait until his condition forces intervention." No one liked that answer. The senior nurse looked toward the closed door. Something about the situation unsettled her in a way she could not explain. It was not just the patient's refusal. It was the pattern, the wording, the intensity behind those 2 words. No medics. Not no doctors. Not no treatment. Specifically medics. She had heard that distinction before. Long ago. A memory stirred, distant but sharp. She stepped closer to the chart station and glanced over the limited file that had been entered. Minimal personal details. Restricted service history. No standard transfer documentation. Even his unit information had been redacted. That alone was unusual. Then she noticed a note added by intake staff. Patient becomes highly agitated when approached in uniformed medical attire. She stared at the words, then looked toward the room again. A realization began forming. Not certainty, but instinct. And she had learned over the years not to ignore instinct. One of the officers noticed her standing there. "You're with the trauma team?" She nodded. He studied her for a moment. "Then you understand this isn't a normal case." "No," she said quietly. "It isn't." He seemed about to say more, then stopped himself. Instead, he asked, "Do you have any ideas?" She hesitated. There was no logical reason for what she was about to suggest. At least none she could explain in a way that would satisfy protocol. But something inside her told her this man was not refusing help out of stubbornness. He was reacting to something rooted far deeper. Fear, memory, training, maybe all three. "I'd like to try speaking with him alone," she said. The officer frowned. "He's rejected everyone." "I know. And you think he'll talk to you?" She glanced toward the room. "I don't know, but I think I should try." By then, several staff members had gathered nearby. The lead physician overheard the conversation and stepped forward. "This is not the time for experiments." She met his gaze evenly. "It's not an experiment." "Then what is it?" She paused. "A chance." He crossed his arms. "We've already given him plenty of chances." "Not like this." There was silence. The physician looked unconvinced, but the officer seemed thoughtful. Finally, he gave a short nod. "One attempt." The doctor objected immediately. "That's not enough oversight." But the officer had already decided. "One attempt," he repeated. The nurse thanked him and moved toward the room. As she reached the door, the younger nurse from earlier caught her arm. "Be careful." She gave a small, reassuring smile, then stepped inside. The room was quieter than expected. The patient sat on the edge of the hospital bed, shoulders tense, eyes fixed on the far wall. The bandage on his arm had begun to darken slightly, but he seemed unaware of it, or uninterested. He did not look up when she entered. She closed the door gently behind her. For several seconds, she said nothing. She simply stood there, allowing the silence to settle. Then she removed her ID badge and set it on the counter. She slipped off her outer medical coat. Now she looked less like hospital staff and more like any ordinary person. Still, he did not react. She took one step closer. "I'm not here as a medic." That got his attention. He turned slightly, just enough to study her face. His eyes were sharp, guarded, but no longer empty. She kept her voice calm. "I'm here because everyone else is trying to fix the injury." She paused. "But I think the real problem started long before you got here." Something shifted in his expression. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. She saw it. A flicker. She knew she had only one chance, and so she leaned closer. Very softly, barely above a whisper, she said a phrase no one outside certain circles would understand. A string of words tied to a military field code used years ago by one specialized unit. A code meant for moments when identification had to happen without revealing too much. The moment the words left her lips, his entire body froze. His breathing stopped. His eyes widened. For the first time since arriving, he looked directly at someone. Really looked. Not through them. At them. The silence between them became electric. Then, in a voice rough with disbelief, he asked one question. "How do you know that code?" Outside the room, everyone waited. No one could hear what was being said. But through the small glass window they saw the impossible. The man who had rejected every medic was finally speaking. And no one knew why. The room seemed smaller after he asked the question. "How do you know that code?" His voice was rough, as if it had not been used properly in days. Maybe longer. There was disbelief in it, but something else too. Fear mixed with memory. The nurse did not answer right away. She studied him for a moment, making sure the connection was real. His eyes had changed. The guarded emptiness was gone. In its place was sharp attention, the kind that came from someone trained never to miss a detail. "That depends," she said quietly. "Do you still remember what comes after it?" For a second, he stared at her as if trying to decide whether she was real. Then, without hesitation, he gave the correct response. It was another coded phrase, one that completed the sequence. She nodded once. That was enough. He leaned back slightly, his jaw tightening. No one outside the unit knew that. Not exactly true, she replied. A long silence followed. He looked at her more carefully now, scanning her face like he was searching through years of memory. But whatever he expected to find, he did not. You weren't military, he said. No. Then how? She moved to the nearby chair and sat down slowly, keeping her posture open and calm. Years ago, I worked in emergency support during overseas recovery missions. I was attached to several field teams. Not as a soldier, as medical support. His expression hardened again at the last two words. She noticed. But not in uniform, she added gently. And not in the way you're thinking. He looked down at his injured arm. That code was retired. So was the mission it came from. He said nothing. Outside the room, the hallway remained crowded. Doctors and nurses pretended to stay busy, but their eyes kept drifting toward the glass. The patient who had rejected everyone was now seated in conversation with the one nurse no one could quite figure out. Inside, the tension had shifted, but it had not disappeared. It had simply become quieter, more personal. What's your name? She asked. He hesitated, then gave it. She repeated it once, softly, as if grounding him in the present. He looked away. That code belonged to my team, he said. We only used it when things went bad. She nodded. I know. You shouldn't know. The words carried no anger, only exhaustion. She understood that tone. It was the sound of someone who had spent too long carrying things alone. You're right, she said. But I do. He studied her again, then asked, Were you there? She held his gaze. Yes. That answer changed something. He straightened slightly, as though his body remembered discipline before his mind caught up. There was a recovery convoy, he said carefully. North sector. Sandstorm. Communications failed. She said nothing. You were on that route? I was. He stared at her, and the disbelief returned. That mission was buried. Most of it. No records. Not public ones. He looked away again, his breathing uneven. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was not awkward. It was heavy with things unsaid. Finally, he asked the question that had been sitting between them from the beginning. Why are you here? She could have answered in many ways. Duty, chance, coincidence. But none of those would have been true. Because you refused every medic, she said. And because I recognized the pattern. His jaw tightened. There is no pattern. There is. He looked irritated, but she continued. You didn't reject doctors. You rejected medics. He said nothing. That distinction matters. Still silence. She leaned forward slightly. Something happened that made that word unbearable to you. His hands clenched. For the first time, she saw his control slip. It lasted only a second. But it was enough. She softened her tone. You're not fighting the hospital. You're fighting what it reminds you of. He stood abruptly and moved toward the window. Outside, several staff members immediately stepped back, startled. But he did not cause a scene. He simply stood there, staring at the hallway beyond the glass. I don't need treatment, he said. That's not true. I've handled worse. I'm sure you have. Her answer was calm, not challenging. That seemed to unsettle him more than resistance would have. He rested one hand against the wall. For years, people kept telling me to talk, to process, to heal. He let out a bitter breath. As if words fix what's broken. No, she said. But silence doesn't either. He turned toward her sharply. She did not flinch. For several seconds, they simply faced each other. Then his expression changed again. Not anger, not fear, just weariness. The kind that settles into someone after too many sleepless nights. You think you understand because you know one code, he said. No, she replied. I think I understand because I've seen what happens when people survive something they were never meant to carry alone. He looked at her for a long time, then slowly returned to the bed. When he sat down, the room felt different, less like a standoff, more like the beginning of something fragile. Outside, the lead physician exchanged confused glances with the officer. No one had expected this. No one knew what had been said, but everyone could see that the patient was no longer resisting. The nurse reached for a small tray on the counter. He stiffened immediately. She stopped. "I'm only cleaning the wound." He hesitated, then gave a small nod. It was the first permission he had offered anyone all day. She approached carefully and unwrapped the field dressing. The injury underneath was deep, but manageable. Still, it should have been treated hours earlier. "You should have let someone do this sooner," she said quietly. "I know. Then why didn't you?" He looked past her. "Because the last time I trusted a medic, I lost more than I could explain." She paused. That was the first real truth he had offered. She did not press. Instead, she worked in silence. He watched her hands. Steady, confident, no wasted movement. There was something grounding about the rhythm. When she finished cleaning the wound, she began applying a fresh dressing. "You've done field care before," he said. "A long time ago." He studied her. "You don't move like hospital staff." She smiled faintly. "I'll take that as a compliment." For the first time, the corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, but close. It was enough to surprise both of them. Then his face turned serious again. "Why didn't you tell them who you were?" She tied the final wrap and stepped back. "Because who I was then doesn't matter here. It matters to me." She met his gaze. "That's different." A knock came at the door. The lead physician entered cautiously. He looked between them, clearly unsure what to expect. "How is he?" The nurse answered first. "Stable. Cooperative." The physician nearly blinked. "Cooperative?" The patient gave him a tired look. "Don't get used to it." The doctor almost smiled. Almost. Then he checked the updated readings and nodded. "We'll need scans and observation." The patient looked ready to argue. The nurse spoke before he could. "Necessary." He exhaled, then reluctantly agreed. As the physician left, he glanced back at her. "What exactly did you say to him?" She simply replied, "The right thing." Once they were alone again, the patient leaned back. "You've made this complicated." She raised an eyebrow. "You were already complicated." That drew the faintest hint of amusement. But then his face darkened. "There's something you should know." Her attention sharpened. "The code you used, it wasn't just for identification." She waited. "It was tied to one unfinished promise." The room grew still. He looked directly at her. "And if you know that code, then you're connected to something that was never resolved." She said nothing. His voice lowered. "Someone has been searching for answers about that mission." A chill passed through her. "Who?" Before he could answer, the door opened again. One of the officers stepped inside, his face tense. He looked at both of them before speaking. "There's a senior command official on the way." The nurse frowned. "For what reason?" The officer hesitated, then said the words that changed everything. "They're here because of her." The room went still. For a second, no one moved. Not the patient on the bed. Not the nurse beside him, not even the officer standing at the door. "They're here because of her." The words settled heavily in the air. The nurse looked at the officer, searching his face for some sign that this was a misunderstanding. But his expression was serious, almost uneasy. "That doesn't make sense," she said. "It didn't to me either," he replied. The patient's voice cut in. "Who's coming?" The officer stepped farther inside and lowered his tone. "A senior command official. Arriving within minutes." The patient frowned. "That level of response for a hospital case? That's what concerns me." The nurse crossed her arms, steady but alert. "Did they say why?" The officer hesitated. "Only that your identity was flagged the moment the code sequence was reported." She stared at him. "My identity?" "Yes." A silence followed. She had not used that phrase in years. She had never spoken it inside a civilian hospital. She had certainly never expected it to trigger anything official. The patient looked at her more closely. You really weren't just medical support, were you? She did not answer. Instead, she turned to the officer. Who reported the code? He shifted uncomfortably. One of the monitoring staff overheard enough through the open comm channel. They filed it as a possible breach. She closed her eyes briefly. A simple conversation. A private attempt to calm a wounded man. And now command was involved. Outside the room, word spread quickly that someone important was arriving. Staff straightened uniforms, administrators whispered in corners, and the usual hospital rhythm gave way to nervous anticipation. Inside, the patient studied her with growing intensity. That mission, he said quietly. You were more than attached support. She looked at him. I was there to recover survivors. That's not what I mean. He leaned forward. The way you spoke, the way command reacted. That's not how they treat ordinary staff. She gave a faint smile, though it carried no humor. Nothing about that mission was ordinary. He held her gaze. Then, after a pause, he asked, what role did you really have? For the first time since entering the room, she looked uncertain. Not afraid, just weighed down by memory. Before she could answer, the hallway outside grew louder. Footsteps, several of them, purposeful, synchronized. The officer at the door straightened immediately. The patient's face hardened. The nurse remained still. A moment later, the door opened. A tall man in a formal military uniform entered, followed by two aides. His presence changed the room instantly. He carried the kind of authority that needed no introduction. But the moment he saw the nurse, his expression shifted. Not suspicion, recognition. He dismissed the aides with one gesture, then stepped forward. It's really you. The room stayed silent. The nurse looked at him for several seconds before speaking. It's been a long time. The patient looked between them. You know each other? The officer gave a short nod. More than that. He turned to the others. This nurse served in a classified civilian liaison role during overseas operations 12 years ago. The physician who had entered behind him looked confused. A civilian liaison caused this level of alert? The official answered without taking his eyes off her. She was embedded in recovery assignments tied to high-risk units. The patient's voice sharpened. Which means? The official finally looked at him. It means she was one of the people responsible for extracting surviving personnel from compromised zones. The patient's expression changed. Slowly, pieces began fitting together. You were there after the convoy. She met his gaze. Yes. You found us. Her silence was answer enough. He looked away, overwhelmed. The room remained tense, but now for different reasons. The official turned back to her. You disappeared after the Northern Corridor operation. I resigned. You were never officially cleared. I know. That file remained open. She exhaled slowly. I also know that. The physician frowned. What exactly are we talking about? No one answered immediately. Finally, the official said, a mission where multiple records were sealed. Personnel were reassigned. Debriefings were incomplete. The physician looked at the nurse with new eyes. And she was part of that? She was central to it. The patient sat upright. Then tell me something. Everyone turned toward him. He looked directly at her. If you were central, why did no one ever mention your name? Her face softened. Because the work was never about being known. That's not an answer. No, she said quietly. But it's the truth. He shook his head. All these years, we thought the convoy was abandoned until another extraction unit came through. She looked at him carefully. That's what they told you? He nodded. Her expression darkened. That wasn't what happened. The room became still again. The official stepped in. This is not the place. It should have been told years ago, she interrupted. The firmness in her voice surprised everyone. Even him. She turned to the patient. There was no second unit. He stared at her. What? The extraction order was delayed. Communications collapsed. We lost contact with command for nearly 6 hours. He said nothing. She continued. When we finally reached your location, The official support route had been rerouted elsewhere. Then who came for us? She looked at him steadily. I did. His face drained of color. You? With one driver and limited field equipment. That's impossible. It should have been. The official lowered his head slightly, as if acknowledging a truth long buried. The patient's voice grew quieter. There were only 3 of us conscious. I know. You carried one of them yourself. She swallowed. Yes. His breathing changed. The memory was returning. Broken pieces reconnecting. You gave me coordinates, he said slowly. Told me to keep repeating them if I lost focus. She nodded. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. It was you. For a long moment no one spoke. The reality of it settled across the room. The person he had spent years unknowingly remembering was standing right in front of him. Not as a rescuer in uniform, but as the quiet nurse who had refused to give up on him. He looked down at his hands. I thought I imagined parts of that night. You didn't. He laughed softly, but there was pain in it. They told us the reports were incomplete because conditions were unstable. She glanced at the official. That was only part of it. He met her eyes. There were decisions made above my level. Convenient ones. He accepted the criticism without defense. The physician stepped back, clearly realizing he was witnessing something far beyond hospital procedure. Then the patient asked the question no one had wanted to face. What unfinished promise was tied to that code? The nurse looked at him, then at the official. Neither answered immediately. At last, she said, before we left that zone, one member of your team asked me to deliver a message if he didn't make it back. The patient froze. Who? She spoke the name softly. His eyes closed. The grief on his face said everything. He survived the evacuation, she continued, but not the transfer. He opened his eyes slowly. And the message? She hesitated, then recited it exactly as she had memorized it years ago. A short line. Simple. Personal. Promise about truth. About unfinished stories. About making sure someone remembered what really happened. The patient's shoulders shook once. Just once. Then he steadied himself. He was my closest friend. I know. He trusted you with that? Yes. He looked down again, then finally asked, why didn't you deliver it sooner? She answered with quiet honesty. Because I couldn't find you. The official stepped forward. We searched too. The patient looked up sharply. Why? The official's face grew serious. Because after that mission, evidence surfaced that key details were altered in official reports. The room shifted. The patient stared. You're saying the mission record was changed? Yes. And now? The official looked at both of them. Now someone has reopened the case. Silence. Then he added the words that made everything heavier. And they believe the nurse holds the missing piece. The room felt different after the official's words settled in. And they believe the nurse holds the missing piece. No one spoke immediately. Even the patient, still sitting on the hospital bed, seemed unsure whether to react or stay still. The idea hung in the air like something too large to fit inside the small room. The nurse stood quietly, her hands relaxed at her sides, though her eyes had grown sharper. That's not true, she said at last. The official did not respond right away. Instead, he studied her carefully, as if trying to measure how much she already knew. It's not about belief, he said finally. It's about the gaps in the record. Your name appears in places it shouldn't, then disappears where it should be confirmed. That doesn't make me a missing piece, she replied. It makes you a key witness, he said. The patient looked between them. This is getting worse, he muttered. The nurse glanced at him. It's already worse than you think. He frowned. What does that mean? She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. It means this wasn't just a rescue mission gone wrong. The official nodded slightly, almost reluctantly. It was reviewed, he added, multiple times. And still incomplete, she said. Yes. The physician finally broke in, unable to stay silent any longer. I need clarity here. We're in a hospital, not an interrogation room. What exactly is being suggested? The official turned toward him. That certain operational details were removed from official documentation after the event. The physician blinked. Removed by whom? No answer came immediately. The patient leaned forward slightly. That's not something they usually admit out loud. The nurse looked at him. No, they don't. A heavy pause followed. The hallway outside remained busy, but inside the room it felt as though time had slowed. The officer at the door shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure where his responsibilities ended. Finally, the official spoke again. There was an internal review after the mission. Some decisions were made to protect classified procedures. The patient let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. Protect procedures, he repeated. That's what they called it? The official did not react. The nurse looked down for a moment, then back at the patient. That's not the whole truth. He studied her face. You've been holding this back for years. She didn't deny it. I was instructed not to speak about it. Even to us? Especially to you. The patient leaned back slowly. So everything I remember is only part of it, she said gently. Silence followed. The idea seemed to sit heavily on him. Years of memory, trust, confusion, all shifting at once. The official stepped forward slightly. There is a reason your unit's code sequence triggered a response at command level. The patient looked up. Then tell me. It's linked to an unresolved extraction discrepancy. The nurse closed her eyes briefly, as if she had expected this moment. The physician looked more confused than ever. Extraction discrepancy? The official nodded. After the mission, reports indicated that not all personnel were accounted for during the final evacuation sweep. The patient stiffened. That's impossible. We all checked in. That's what the record states, the official said. The nurse opened her eyes again. But the field logs don't match that record. The room went still again. The patient looked at her sharply. You saw the logs? Yes. When? Shortly after the mission. His expression hardened. Then why didn't you correct it? She exhaled slowly. Because I was removed from access before I could file anything officially. The official nodded once. That part is accurate. The patient stared at both of them. So someone cut you out of the system? It wasn't that simple, she said. Then explain it. She hesitated again, and this time her voice softened. I was asked to submit a preliminary report before debriefing was complete. I did, but before the final report phase, my clearance was revoked. The patient frowned. Revoked by who? She glanced briefly at the official. By order from above operational command. The official did not correct her. That alone said enough. The physician took a step back, realizing how far above his level this conversation had gone. The patient rubbed his face with his good hand. This doesn't make sense, he said quietly. If something was wrong with the report, why not fix it? The nurse answered without hesitation. Because fixing it would have revealed who changed it. That statement landed hard. The room grew even quieter. The patient looked up at her again. And you think I was part of what was hidden? No, she said immediately. I think you were part of what was protected. The distinction mattered. He noticed it. The official stepped in again. The concern now is not only historical accuracy. The patient narrowed his eyes. Then what is it? The possibility that someone still active is monitoring the remaining links to that mission. The nurse went still. The patient noticed. You didn't know that, he said. She shook her head slightly. No, the official continued. When the code sequence was repeated in this hospital, it matched a secondary trigger pattern that was never publicly declassified. The physician looked alarmed. A trigger pattern? The officer at the door finally spoke. It's an alert mechanism used for identifying surviving classified unit connections. The patient let out a slow breath. So my refusal to be treated activated something? The nurse finished. He looked at her. And you walking in and saying that code? She nodded. Confirmed it. The realization seemed to settle over him like a weight. I didn't mean to cause this, he said. No one did, she replied. But even as she said it, the official's expression suggested uncertainty. Outside the room, footsteps grew louder again, this time faster, more urgent. The door opened abruptly, and a second officer stepped in, slightly out of breath. Sir, he said to the senior official, we've received a secondary alert from headquarters. The official turned sharply. What kind? The officer hesitated. Directive review. Immediate inquiry into all personnel connected to the Northern Corridor mission. The nurse's expression tightened. That's fast. The patient looked between them. What does that mean for me? The official answered carefully. It means your case is now part of a broader investigation. And her? The patient asked, nodding toward the nurse. The official did not answer immediately. That silence was answer enough. The nurse spoke quietly. It means I'm going to be questioned. The patient frowned. Because you helped save us? Because I'm the last confirmed person linked directly to the extraction timeline. The physician finally interrupted. This is still a hospital patient. You can't just turn this into a field investigation. The official turned to him. No one is doing that here. But his tone lacked full reassurance. The patient slowly stood up from the bed. Immediately, the nurse moved forward. Don't. He stopped. I'm fine, he said. You're not, she replied. He looked at her. You've been watching me for hours. I know what I can handle. That's not what I'm talking about. She stepped closer. This situation is expanding. You need to stay out of it. He shook his head. No. Not this time. The official observed them carefully. You're still under medical care, he reminded the patient. The patient didn't look at him. I've been under worse conditions. That's not the point. The nurse turned slightly toward the official. What exactly are you planning to do? He met her gaze. Secure the chain of information, verify your account, and determine whether any external compromise occurred. Her expression tightened. And if you decide I'm compromised? He paused. That is not the assumption. But again, the answer was careful. Too careful. The patient noticed. So I'm just supposed to sit here while all of this happens? The official looked at him. You are stable. You are safe. For now. The nurse added quietly. That changed the tone again. The patient looked at her. What aren't you saying? She hesitated. Then spoke honestly. If someone is trying to reconstruct what happened that night, they will not stop at documents. The room went still. The physician looked unsettled. Are you suggesting danger to staff? The nurse did not answer directly. I'm saying unfinished investigations always reach people who were never meant to be involved. The officer at the door shifted again. The official exhaled slowly. Which is why additional security protocols are being activated. The patient looked at the nurse. So what happens now? She met his eyes. Now things move faster than we expected. A brief silence followed. Then, quietly, the official said something that changed the air in the room completely. The inquiry team wants to speak with you both within the hour. The nurse did not respond immediately. The patient did. And if we refuse? The official looked at him. You won't be given that option. The words settled in the room like a final weight. You won't be given that option. No one responded right away. Even the patient, who had faced danger before and carried it in his silence, seemed to understand that this was no longer just about a hospital case. The situation had moved beyond treatment, beyond recovery, beyond anything normal. It had become something else entirely. The nurse stood very still. Her expression did not show panic, but something quieter. Awareness. The kind that comes when someone realizes a door has closed behind them. The official broke the silence first. Transport will be ready in 40 minutes. The physician stepped forward immediately. This is still my patient. He cannot be moved in his condition. The official turned slightly toward him. He is stable enough for supervised transfer. That's not the same as fit, the physician insisted. The nurse finally spoke. He's not going anywhere like this. All eyes turned to her. The patient looked at her too, surprised by the firmness in her voice. She continued, more controlled now. He needs proper monitoring before any movement. If you push him now, you risk more than just his recovery. The official studied her carefully. You're still thinking like a field medic, he said. I'm thinking like someone who has seen what happens when protocol replaces judgment, she replied. A brief silence followed. The patient exhaled slowly. I'm not being moved, he said. The official did not argue immediately. Instead, he looked at him for a long moment. This is not a request. The patient met his gaze. And I'm not refusing treatment. I'm refusing confusion. That statement shifted the energy again. The officer at the door adjusted his stance. The physician looked between them, clearly frustrated by the lack of control. The nurse stepped closer to the patient. Her voice softened. You need to stay here for now. He frowned slightly. And let them take you instead? I can handle myself. That's not what I'm worried about. She paused. For the first time, something unspoken passed between them. Not fear exactly, but understanding of how quickly situations could escalate beyond intention. The official broke in again. The inquiry team will expect cooperation. The nurse turned toward him. Then give them the truth, not a rushed version of it. His expression tightened. That is not within my authority. That's the problem, she said quietly. The patient looked at her. You're still not telling me everything. She did not deny it. Instead, she looked at him carefully. There are parts of that mission that were never written down in any report. He frowned. Like what? She hesitated, then answered carefully. Like who was actually in command when things went wrong. The room went still again. The official's expression changed slightly, just for a moment. The physician noticed it. The patient did too. You're saying someone above you made decisions in the field? The patient asked. The nurse nodded once. Yes. The official finally spoke. That is not confirmed. It was witnessed, she replied. That sentence changed everything again. The patient looked at her, trying to process it. You saw it happen? She lowered her gaze briefly. I saw orders change in real time. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before. Outside, the hospital continued its normal rhythm, unaware of how much tension had built in one small room. Inside, everything felt suspended. The official finally exhaled. We are not here to reopen old command disputes. No, the nurse said. You're here because something from that past is still unresolved. The patient leaned back slightly. And I'm caught in the middle of it. She looked at him. Yes. He let out a short breath. That's a lot to take in. The nurse's voice softened. I know. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the patient said something unexpected. Tell me what I need to know. The nurse looked at him. That's not a simple answer. I'm not asking for simple. The official shifted slightly. You are still under medical observation. The patient didn't look at him. I've been under observation since I got here. That hasn't stopped anything from happening. The nurse glanced at the official, then back at the patient. There's something you should understand before anything else moves forward. He waited. She continued. Whatever is being reviewed now is not just about what happened in that mission. It's about what someone believes was left behind. The patient frowned. Left behind? She nodded slowly. Information, evidence, possibly even individuals who were never properly accounted for. The patient's expression tightened. That sounds like people got erased from records. The nurse did not answer directly, but her silence confirmed too much. The official stepped forward again. That is speculation. The nurse turned toward him. No, she said quietly. It's not. The tension in the room rose again. The physician spoke, his voice strained. I need to know if my patient is safe here. The official replied carefully. He is safe under supervision. That's not reassuring, the physician said. The nurse looked at the patient. I won't let anything happen to you, she said. He studied her. You already did more than that. Something shifted in her expression at that. Not guilt. Something deeper. Memory. The patient continued. You brought me back from something I don't fully remember. You stayed when everyone else left the room. That wasn't just protocol. She nodded slightly. No, it wasn't. Then what was it? She paused, then answered simply. Responsibility. The words seemed to settle between them. The official checked his watch. The transport window is closing. The nurse stepped forward. Then delay it. He looked at her. That is not possible. It is if you care about accuracy more than speed. A tense pause followed. Then, unexpectedly, the patient spoke again. She's right. Everyone looked at him. He continued. If you rush this, you don't just move a patient. You move unanswered questions. The official frowned. You are not part of this inquiry structure. I didn't ask to be, he replied. Silence returned. The nurse looked at him again, this time with something softer in her expression. Understanding, perhaps, or respect. The official finally made a decision. 30-minute delay, he said. The officer at the door nodded and stepped out immediately. The physician looked relieved, but still tense. The nurse exhaled slowly. The patient leaned back slightly. Better, he said quietly. But the nurse did not look relaxed. She turned slightly toward the window. Something outside had caught her attention. The patient noticed. What is it? She didn't answer immediately. Her focus remained fixed on something beyond the glass. Then she said quietly, We're not the only ones being watched. The official turned sharply. What did you say? She stepped closer to the window. I've seen that pattern before. The patient frowned. What pattern? She finally looked back at them. The way people observe a situation without officially engaging it. The physician looked uneasy. You think someone is monitoring this hospital? I think someone has been monitoring him since he arrived. The patient went still. The official narrowed his eyes. That is not confirmed. The nurse met his gaze. No, but it is consistent. A heavy silence followed. Then the patient asked quietly, Since when? She looked at him. Since before you refused the first medic. That line changed the room again. The patient's expression tightened. So this didn't start here. She shook her head slightly. No. The official finally spoke. This is escalating faster than anticipated. The nurse turned to him. Then stop treating it like paperwork. He didn't respond immediately. Outside, movement in the corridor increased again. Footsteps. Multiple voices. Something approaching. The nurse looked at the door. Her expression changed subtly. Alert now. The patient noticed. What is it? Before anyone could answer, the door opened again. But this time it wasn't an officer or physician. It was a different figure entirely. A new presence stepped into the room. Calm, composed, and carrying a folder marked with clear authorization stamps. They looked directly at the nurse first, then at the patient, and finally spoke. We need to clarify the final missing link in the Northern Corridor operation. The room went completely silent.